English translation, 650th contact, Monday the 4th of April 2016, 11:16 hours.
Hello, Ptah. Pleased to see you. Welcome and salute, dear friend. Although I did not expect you at this time, but only in the late afternoon, I am always happy when you come for a visit.
Thank you for your welcome, and greetings to you too, Edward, dear friend.
As usual, I have questions when I can bring them up right away, when you have nothing else that needs to be discussed first.
Nothing special comes up on my end, so you can ask. But it should be so that we, as usual, can also have our private conversation after the official conversation.
Of course. Then the following, which would interest me, namely the matter of the little more than 144,000 extraterrestrials who came to Earth from the subsequent peoples of Nocodemion and also died here. Their spirit forms were and are since then on Earth, of course, always classified as reincarnation, even in bodies of newborn personalities again and again. It must be said, however, that these 144,000 or so people must in no way be associated with the alleged 144,000 light beings from the Santinians who are supposed to live on Earth, which corresponds to complete nonsense. Also absurd is the Christian religious assertion that allegedly 144,000 are chosen, according to Christian faith. Of course, only Christians should be the ones who are therefore favored by the Christian religion and its sects, who are to be deprived and saved when the world perishes, as already absurdly claimed in the Bible. But what interests me now is, where do the 144,000 spirit forms enliven today's people? Or where do the associated personalities live today who came to Earth about 13,500 years ago? And my question only refers to these 144,000, but not to others of the same number. To my knowledge, they should at the present time be scattered all over the entire Earth, indeed mostly one by one, as it emerges from the Nocodemian storage bank.
We have detailed records of this which lead back to the prophet Enoch and which also say exactly what you just said. The little more than 144,000 spirit forms of the then distant descendants from Nocodemian peoples, who immigrated to Earth about 13,500 years ago, exist at present partly in living personalities, which are scattered all over Earth practically in all peoples, whereby they usually live their lives individually. Today there are also a few small groups, but they are really very small and consist of only a few people and are concerned with the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life. These new personalities have come together in modern times, whose primeval ancestors came to Earth from foreign worlds at an early age, to form small groups from the 144,000 or so Nocodemian peoples, as a result of the missionary spread emanating from you and the Figu. Thus it is said that these small groupings have arisen from the ongoing mission efforts, whereby among these groupings there are of course not only personalities who come from the 144,000 or so former successors of Nocodemion, but there are also persons among them who possess pure Earth-created spirit forms, following that they are pure Earth humans. But also these, or at least a part of them, are oriented towards the creational natural laws and recommendations as taught by the doctrine, and also with them everything happens apart from religions and sects. In any case, these are our findings, which we have arrived at as a result of our curiosity through clarifications and observations. And it must still be said that, of course, only a certain part of each of the 144,000 or so spirit forms enlivens new personalities who are in current lives, whereby we assume an estimate of about half in this respect.
So about half, then they are quite thinly sown in the mass Earth humanity of more than 8.5 billion, 8,500 million. But another question. Did you receive the question from Florina regarding the name Billy Edward Albert Meier? When did you talk about it?
Yes, and here I have the excerpt from it. It was a private conversation on the 26th of April, 1990, after our official conversation. I came to speak of it because you yourself had come to speak of it in relation to your names.
Private conversation excerpt after the 236th official contact conversation from the 26th of April, 1990.
In my life, I was already named with various names from childhood, so I was called Edie by my mother, Bartley by my father, for example, Bartiger or Bartragender, but also Schwartley, because I stacked up rind in the carpentry sawmill Sieber in Niederflachs Bulak. That is to say, rind cut away from spruce and fir trunks or about 20 centimeters wide bark bands with still about 3 to 4 centimeters bark fiber wood on it. My brothers and sisters called me Edie or Bobby, like the meaning of Jack. The name Edie remained at school, but I was called Pope by several boys, because I always had the best grade in religious education, and on the other hand, 2 also called me biologist, because I also knew a lot about natural history and local history. And because I could sing well too, 2 students thought they had to call me Singing Genius. Among certain adults in Niederflachs and in the barracks, 2 married couples called me Peacemaker. Then I was called Phantom by certain lawbreakers in the Near and Middle East as well as Persia, India, Iraq and Pakistan, but also UFO Man, Dr. Saab and Dr. Snakecatcher in northern India, and Gilgamesh in West Pakistan. The name Billy was also given to me in Persia, in Tehran, by a U.S. American named Judy Reed, who came from Los Angeles and compared me to Billy the Kid and Wild Bill Hickok, according to my outfit. Just my Wild West air and the revolver belt around the hip, etc. So she called me Billy. And that name has remained with me and has been spread throughout the world. And finally I got the name and title Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah in Karachi, Pakistan. But since 1969 I am back in my homeland, where since 1975 a new name is formed for me, which is well known, UFO Meier. I would now like to ask, just long speech, short meaning, whether you know anything about whether all these names were predetermined or not.
In this respect, we do have knowledge, because in our annals some time ago I found all these names and designations from the records of Enoch in relation to your person. Enoch, it was during his work on Earth at that time, when he fathomed the Nocademian prophet line by foresight up to the 3rd millennium about 13,500 years ago, recorded all these names and designations. Whereby, however, still another name is given which will be called for you and world famous. This name will be composed of the first letters of all your names, Billy Edward Albert Meier, hence the new pseudonym Billy Edward Albert Meier. From this comes the English word for ray, and as such the mission will spread throughout the world and carry the doctrine into the farthest future. It is written in the annals of Enoch, and it will be.
Interesting. Then I guess I will be allowed to pass that on, won't I? I am sure some people are interested.
It will be, and it will be unavoidable. It will also be important that you inform Michael Hesseman about this fact, because he will deal intensively and positively with our contacts and with your person in the near future. Also through this, the term Billy Edward Albert Meier for your person will soon be carried out into the world, whereby it is also up to you to use this term personally.
I can do that. And when I go to Wetzikon next time, I will have a stamp made for my letter senders, etc., on which Billy Edward Albert Meier is attached.
That'll be good.
Thank you, Ptah. Bernadette could use this private conversation excerpt for my biography. Then I would like to come now, however, again on the approximately 144,000 Nocademian People's Earth immigrants. In this respect, I am still interested in where they settled when they immigrated to Earth. But by this I do not mean those immigrants who came here about 13,500 years ago, whose 144,000 were also about, but those earlier 144,000 who came to Earth 389,000 years ago and already at that time caused disaster, and for the most part were withdrawn again. Can you say something about that? I am also interested in why this number was so important then, if you know about it.
Also about this, there are exact details in our annals which I have studied, so I can answer your questions. First, the number of 144,000 people corresponds to a very early norm of emigration power created by Nocodemion, which was usually led by 228 commanders, although there were seldom small exceptions, who, together with the emigration power, were under the command of an emigration Swiss. Such emigration powers were volunteers who idealistically agreed to spend the rest of their lives with Early humans on other worlds as well as on Earth, in order to teach them many helpful things about life management and development. For the first time, such an emigration force was sent out millions of years ago, followed by several more in 4 galaxies over all times, and thus also into the Sol system and finally to Earth. The last one to Earth was sent according to earthly time calculation about 13,500 years ago, where the Nocodemian people emigrants on the one hand were to have an instructive effect on Earth humans, which they partly did, but on the other hand caused for the most part many calamities, especially with regard to rising up as deities and bringing religions into being. And they did so when they were smuggled into all earthly peoples and great tribal communities, whereby delusional beliefs in God developed among all peoples, tribes, and groups, etc. throughout the world, even among wild indigenous tribes. This led to the emergence of religions and sects, which expanded more and more and have survived to the present day and into the 3rd millennium, respectively, and will continue to do so for a very long time to come. All those of these extraterrestrial immigrants who remained on Earth also died there. And since then, their spiritual forms have also reincarnated and will continue to reincarnate on Earth, precisely in ever new personalities of newly born Earth humans. So the 144,000 emigrants and their superiors and leaders were integrated worldwide as instructors into all existing earthly peoples and large tribes, as well as various groups in which they had to act as instructors. And like I said, many also fulfilled this obligation and thus led Earth humanity in technical, medical, and scientific regard on a higher level, however always in accordance with the possibilities prevailing at that time and also further on Earth. In this way, everything has been carried and developed since then up to the present time, consequently by the descendants of the old extraterrestrial immigrants from the Nocodemion descendants who came to Earth, who since then have been born again and again as new personalities and continue to be born. Innovations in medicine and technology, etc., as well as new insights and expanded knowledge have been brought and continue to be brought. And many of these distant descendants of the former 144,000 Nocodemian descendants, ethnic emigrants, became and are, as a result of their evolution of consciousness and their abilities of various kinds transferred to them by their total conscious blocks, very talented in certain areas and powerful in this respect in progressive innovations which are not yet possible for the pure earth-created Earthmen. And such persons from the number of 144,000 as well as various others at other times, but also in the number of 144,000 each, were also the ones whom we, as the authoritative inventors, researchers, physicians, technicians, computer scientists and scientists, etc. of certain areas on Earth, taught about knowledge, insights, and developments, etc. in an apparatus impulse hypnotic manner, and without their knowledge, which was made possible for us by our directives. Therefore, when we committed ourselves to this teaching activity, we were only allowed to take care of the distant descendants of the former immigrants of the Nocodemion descendant peoples who were in active life. But we were not allowed to take care of any pure terrestrial human beings who existed from the ground up.
How often did the Nocodemian descendants of such emigration powers, each comprising 144,000 people, come to Earth? And what would also be of interest to me here would be the number of people who have finally remained on Earth and died there as a whole of these immigrants. So that they were born again on Earth as new personalities and continue to be born? It would really be very interesting to know this, if you have records of it.
Such records actually exist in our annals, some of which are directly attributed to the prophet Nocodemian, but also to his successors Henoch and Enoch. If for a moment, yes, here, yes, our annals refer to a number of 8 different emigration powers of 144,000 persons each and 228 superiors each, who came to Earth in the course of more than 2 million years from the Nocodemian descendant peoples. And here is a total number of 1,151,828 people who were involved. Of these persons, 575,914 remained on Earth, died there and are born again with their old reincarnating spirit forms as new personalities.
And these have been decisive since time immemorial with regard to all developments and great achievements of humanity on Earth, are also active in the modern age, and will continue to be so in the future. Through their help, in the course of time, many pure Earth humans could also develop to a high level of knowledge and can. Consequently, a great deal of progress has been made for some time in all areas, and in every respect also by pure Earth humans, I think, isn't it?
That's true, but it's still mainly the reborn new personalities of the former Nocodemian descendants who are in the foreground.
Can I understand it? But how did it happen that 144,000 each agreed to give up their highly developed culture and live on Earth with early humans like Homo erectus?
On the one hand, they were pronounced idealists who were willing to provide development aid, so to speak, as is similarly the case on Earth, where such aid is provided for third world countries, etc. On the other hand, they were also very active in the field of development aid.
Then it kind of rubbed off on Earth humans.
You can say that, but on the other hand, there were also genetically manipulated refugees from the Sirius regions among the immigrants from the Nocodemian descendants, as well as fallible, that is to say, delinquents of the home planets, who preferred, instead of being sent into exile, which was applied in the most drastic and severe manner, to emigrate with such emigration powers and at liberty to teach early humans in the manufacture of various kinds of products, such as tools and hunting weapons, clothing and food containers, etc. Primitive art, music, and all kinds of knowledge were also taught to early man by these immigrants, as well as knowledge concerning the heavenly bodies, medicine concerning medicinal plants, etc., and the use of fire, etc.
And how and where were the distributions of these immigrant persons made among the early earthly human beings?
Small immigrant groups were formed, which were integrated into earthly early human groups all over the world, while others joined early humans as loners or lived as their own small groups, which then also mixed with the early humans over time. In these forms, it was possible that mergers with the immigrants and the early humans could come about, which was, however, not always simple, but often connected with fights, which also claimed deaths on both sides. But in the end, everything regulated itself in one way or another so that the teachings could also take place and bear fruit.
So the whole thing was not easy, but therefore the actual creators of all progressive inventions of the early humans were to be led back to the immigrants of the Nocodemian descendants peoples. And this was the only reason why the humanity of today, which emerged from the early humans, could develop so drastically fast and as far as is the case today, with regard to electronics, inventions, craftsmanship, art, medicine, music and technology, etc., and so on. In principle, it would not have been possible without the direct immigrants from the Nocodemian peoples, and without their distant descendants and all their teachings, as well as also without your apparatus impulse hypnotic influence of the descendants of the extraterrestrial. Immigrants that earthly mankind could develop so rapidly and to a large extent up to the today's conditions.
During the first millions of years and millennia, this was indeed the case. Of course, only in primitive developments of various things, for everything always had to be adapted to the corresponding state of consciousness of Earth humanity. This is because it was only possible to avoid an overdevelopment in every respect, because such an overdevelopment could not have been coped with by the Earth humans in terms of understanding and reason. The early extraterrestrial immigrants naturally had to withhold their knowledge as well as their abilities and possibilities in every imaginable form, and to downgrade themselves in this respect in order not to overtax the early earthly humans, who became known as Homo erectus through research in modern times, and also later the more highly developed earthly humans with excessive abilities. On the one hand and on the other hand in order to adapt to them in every necessary way. However, the early Earth humans were very instructive, as are to some extent the Earth humans of today, but unfortunately not with regard to the teaching of the truth. Teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, and quickly learned the simple things, followed by a relatively fast development and continued to do so. As a result, they also created advances, inventions, knowledge and developments, which have continued to behave in this way in all the long periods of time since then, and have carried us into the future, even to the point of Homo sapiens, and also into the present time of Homo sapiens sapiens. So, in later times, the Earth humans who developed from it came from the Homo erectus, whereby, however, also various intermediate kinds developed from it, namely in the today's Asia areas as well as in Africa, whereby a very important basic origin was given in Europe, namely in the today's Germany, where a basic life form developed, from which in the end a human life form developed, which developed then, however, in the southern hemisphere completely. In the first beginnings, early humans were used as sexual partners by the first Nocodemian descendants, immigrants of peoples, so one has to say, whereby over a large number of generations several new human species arose, which are called Nephotwesen or Mischwesen in our annals. From these a new human species emerged, which is also known to earthly scientists as Denisova Man, and which was an important factor in the further development of mankind on Earth, together with the Neanderthals and so on.
Well, then the question. The emigration troops have paired with the early Earthlings. Did modern people ultimately emerge from this? At that time, I think there was only Homo erectus. But then came the Denisova people, who our scientists already know, as you say.
This is not quite true, because the scientists are still in the process of clarifying and speculating and do not have any real knowledge in this respect. All they've got is some small fossils to speculate on.
You mean that they make hypotheses, or simply assumptions and assumptions, because they have no actual proof of what, where, and from what kind of people the fossils originate?
Yes, it is.
Homo erectus was probably a clever fellow when I rhymed everything you said. Can you say something about that?
Homo erectus means the upright walking man. Basically, he was the first true Earth man who was a direct ancestor of the Neanderthals and thus also the primeval ancestor of the actual Earth human of today. Homo erectus was contrary to the false assertions of earthly researchers and scientists, about 2.7 million years ago the successor of those first human beings who emerged from the first hominid primate-like beings, but who were not primates from the ground up, but first hominid beings, only that these looked wild and primate-like in their outward appearance, but had no reason whatsoever with primates. According to our research, the first of these species existed on Earth around 12 million years ago. Homo erectus emerged 2.7 million years ago from natural earthly hominid development, and it was also effectively the most successful hominid Earth ever produced. The first emigrating power and extraterrestrial visitors, who had already immigrated to Earth at that time, mixed early with the Homo erectus, who were still very wild but nevertheless peaceful, pure Earth creatures. From this, a small new species developed from the genus Homo erectus, which was then also of very long existence, increased further and from which also still another new species developed. Most of the extraterrestrial visitors, however, left Earth and did not return. After that, about 1 million years ago and also afterwards, 4 more emigration powers came to Earth, of which a small number remained, while the majority left again. Then, 389,000 years ago, the 144,000 more immigrants of the distant descendants of the Nocodemian descendants, who also mixed worldwide. Like all other immigrants, with pure terrestrial human beings came, as you mentioned, 144,000 more immigrants. From all these, and in mixture with other hominid forms of development, Earthman Homo sapiens sapiens, living today, emerged in the end since primeval times, actually as a very far-developed Homo erectus, who is to be called the actual direct primeval ancestor of Earthman. Furthermore, it is a fact that, with respect to Homo erectus, this was not a hairy early man monstrosity that simply ran wildly swinging a club around and knocked down anything that got in his way. The Homo erectus did not just growl and make any dull noises either, because in fact it was already able to articulate itself understandably. So the early ancestor of the terrestrial man was different in this respect from the false views of terrestrial researchers. Homo erectus already had a lot of abilities very early on through the teachings of the extraterrestrial visitors, for example with regard to the production and use of fire. He was also not simply a cave dweller, even if there were such exceptions, because he effectively built huts for his own use, made hunting weapons and tools, partly cooked his food and built boats for water, etc., all through the teachings of the extraterrestrial immigrants. And these abilities, along with many others, which Homo erectus had learned through the immigrants, he also passed on to his descendants, whereby these values have been preserved up to the present time in the terrestrial human being and have, moreover, been extraordinarily extended in terms of development. Already at the first time of its existence, Homo erectus was very adaptable and comparatively peaceful, which has been preserved to this day in those terrestrial humans who are not affected by the hereditary gene manipulation of the X chromosome caused by the Syrians.
Unfortunately, it is likely that the mixing of human beings and the very early growth of earthly mankind has led to the genetic manipulation of the X chromosome spreading across the entire Earth, with the spread of heredity becoming more and more blatant as a result of the ever-growing overpopulation and the evil of more and more wars, strife, lack of freedom and disharmony, etc. arising.
That's how it can be explained and seen, yes.
If I may go back to it, you said that according to your estimates about half of the 144,000 people in modern times would be in active lives. Do I simply have to start from those who came to Earth about 13,500 years ago? Or do I also have to include the retards of the other and former emigration powers?
Our estimates refer to all those left behind of all emigration powers. That is to say, to the known number of 575,914 of all emigration powers of 1,151,828 persons, whereby, according to our calculations in modern times, and thus also at present, approximately 287,707 personalities are in active life on Earth, whereby the majority of them work in many important fields and only very few are of minor importance. We cannot exactly determine the exact number because we do not yet have any possibilities to fathom the state of consciousness very precisely.
And all these about 287,707 personalities are distributed practically in all peoples of Earth, if I have understood correctly, right?
That is true, and we include in it the constant change that results from the change of deaths and births.
Thank you. Then we will finally have clarity in this respect as to how everything has happened. This also refutes the weak-headed assertion of those lunatics who swear that humanity on Earth was created by extraterrestrials, such as the Raelian sect and other sects spread this nonsense.
Extraterrestrials have, in very early and also in more recent times, only interfered in the development of the ancient terrestrial early human beings, which is why they have played certain determining roles in this respect and have also brought calamity to the Earth. This, too, in the wise of their mating and mixing with the terrestrial early humans beings, and so bringing the Syrian genetic manipulation to the Earth. The latter has then spread on a large scale among the earthly humankind by way of heredity and has through aggression, disharmony, jealousy, wars, murders, manslaughter, unpeace, and unfreedom, etc., brought a great deal of calamity and has preserved it up to the present time. But so this did not happen as a result of a creation of Earth humans by extraterrestrials and alleged Elohim, etc., by extraterrestrial immigrants, who mated and mixed with the early herd people. On the one hand, only the Syrian gene manipulation and other gene transfers caused by race were spread worldwide by inheritance. And on the other hand, already early, the generally all-encompassing and at that time possible primitive development was promoted in various relations. Only in these forms did the extraterrestrial immigrants of all times make reference to the terrestrial human beings, but never in such a way that terrestrial humanity was created by them, extraterrestrials. So the effective truth is that humanity on Earth has emerged as its own creation from the development of life forms on Earth itself. Although certain genetic factors of extraterrestrial immigrants have remained in it from the early days of early earthly humans and also from later times, as well as Syrian gene manipulation in large parts.
And that you, Player, through your teachings, try to do something against the misconduct and the mischief of the old extraterrestrial immigrants. Just by teaching and informing, you consider this simply as your obligation, because the old immigrants belong to the Nocodemian descendant peoples, just like you, Playarin. That's the point, isn't it?
That's so, yes.
Then this will also be discussed and clarified. But then there is another question open, and that is the one I asked Florina to submit to you and to look for the corresponding interview report. It was then, when Quetzal spoke at the beginning of the 1980s about which new group members would join the Figu and what would partly arise in their private sphere and thus also in the Figu. This private conversation would be important for me, because I was asked again and again, and just recently more often, that it had been said that and would form an alliance with each other, although I declared early in the 1980s that, according to Quetzal, you had made a foresight in this regard, which discouraged such an alliance. At that time, according to Quetzal's statements, I said that this alliance or relationship between and as well as others, because a catastrophe in terms of a psychic conscious form would result both in terms of and, which would have to be considered as possibly killing itself one day.
Florina informed me that I had chosen the part of the conversation you wanted from the private conversation between you and Quetzal, and could name it after you. Quetzal addressed these issues in your official 156th conversation on the 13th of December 1981. After that, however, he and I made an effort to further examine his individual statements, which were based on foresight, which we still carried out at the time, in order to know to some extent how everything would develop, with a view to the future, whereupon Quetzal again raised the matter in the 158th contact conversation on the 3rd of January 1982. The reason we did foresight was to be helpful to you by providing you with important information that you could act upon in this and that situation. Even though you had the characteristic from your boyhood to always think everything through thoroughly and to draw the logical and thus the right conclusions from a matter and to act accordingly, we found that we too should contribute something. Therefore, we acted in the manner mentioned and researched various things from the future for your information. And because we knew with certainty, from your early childhood, when you were still under my father's protection, that you could always cope with whatever approached you, both consciously and psychologically. So we also knew that once you set a goal, you will always keep it and never give it up, but strive for it to succeed and only be satisfied when you have achieved it. But it was clear to us that you would also master our predictions and use them to achieve your set goals, even if the conditions were difficult or not good, because for you there has always been only a forward since your childhood, but never a backward. That was even the case when you were called to the 111th contact conversation with my daughter Simyase and Quetzal on the 17th of July, 1978, where you collapsed in a forest as a result of the terrible conditions and the anger you had suffered, etc. in the group due to total overloading of your psyche and nerves, and were found by my daughter Simyase and Quetzal and awakened from your fainting and treated, after which Jacobus and Elsa brought you back to the center.
Yes, I remember at that time all hell had broken loose in me, and I had the greatest trouble to keep an eye on the construction of the mission, and thus also on the construction of the center. Unfortunately, it was not enough with the collapse because everything went on again when I was back in the center, so a second collapse followed. But in the end I made it.
What is still not comprehensible for me today, despite my medical and psychological knowledge.
You do not have to think about that now, because the whole thing is long over and no longer has any meaning today. Now would be a good time for you to give me the excerpt.
Of course. But when you call up and write down today's conversation, you should leave out all the names and only replace them with a dot, as we have been doing for some time now, to avoid unpleasantness with people addressed by names.
Of course, that's what I will do, because I know that data protection is always being insisted on, and that malicious people are quickly prepared to take legal action against the Figu and especially against me if their names are publicly mentioned.
Well, then listen to what you and Quetzal discussed back then.
Private conversation excerpt from the 3rd of January, 1982.
The information I gave on the 13th of December in the 156th official contact conversation regarding the newly appearing group members and their alliance connections among themselves require significant changes and explanations. This is because in the meantime we have carried out clarifying foresight in this regard, from which it has become clear that certain alliance connections among the new group members will not result in permanence in the long term, but rather in severe psychological and personal disorders and suicide risks. Particularly in this respect, it means that the alliance link between the two countries, which was announced on the 13th of December last year, and because these two, when they unite in an alliance, destroy each other psychically, consciously, and also physically in a pathological way, whereby the whole thing is fundamentally different from is going to go out. Therefore, when the time comes, you are to advise both of them that by destiny instruct and teach the children, but in the same way as they also instruct and teach, but should not enter into an alliance with him. So, in this regard, both should distance themselves from each other and join together only in the way that this has to do with the children in an instructive way, while he should fulfill his purpose regarding the management of the center grounds and place himself in your care and instruction. This must be so that he can gradually free himself from his psychological conscious disorder, which corresponds to a bipolar disorder that has affected him since his youth. Since his youth, he has been living in a bipolar disorder and thus between an overflowing euphoria, physical and psychological self-injury, and a death wish. In this way, he experiences a dangerous interplay of uncontrolled thoughts and feelings, so he has a manic depressive disorder that may cost him his life. And this condition would also affect if she would enter into an alliance connection with him, which is why, when the time is given, you have to explain that between both there should be only the purpose of the teaching, as this is predefined.
That does not look good, so I wonder why this man should come to our group at all.
It is his destiny from time immemorial that we must not counteract.
Then we charge ourselves with all sorts of things, and in the end we are surely made liable and insulted for his illness and his wrong actions.
Which, unfortunately, will be the case, and will also be involved in it. If she then, contrary to our advice, does come up with, which, according to our foresight, will unfortunately be the case, as well as the fact that both will then break away from your group because, despite your efforts, they will not have learned anything from the teaching, as is also the case with as well as who will also join your group in the coming time and will be there for decades. The thanks of all of them for all your teaching efforts will be that they will insult the group members as well as the group leadership style, and thus you. But there will be many other unpleasant things to come, also concerning your wife and later also concerning 2 of your children, who will turn away from you because of their slander. And unfortunately, it will also be the case that other group members who are still to come will come together in alliance-based connections, but will not have any permanence in these, as is the case with, and as well as with, and will be the case, why you should speak with them and urge them not to join forces. And I tell you this, although I know from our foresight that your efforts will be useless. You, for your part, have done your duty. Later it will also be the same for other new group members, such as, but also with, he himself will already be living in the center in a year's time, and in the course of the next 3.5 decades will create a confused world of lies in himself, in which he will become more and more entangled and no longer find his way out. Similarly, the alliance that will be formed between the coming new group members and will not be of long duration, because this connection will be of a as much as with, who deal with will let in. The alliance between and will only be of very short duration, as it would be the case. However, if everything could result exactly according to the traditional provision, consequently in this case, in no way the same prerequisites can be assumed will not be fallible, but as contrary.
So it will be a good thing if, when the time comes, I address the members concerned and at least tell them that they should refrain from such a connection. Or what do you think?
Of course you can do this, or you should do it, but only if the group members themselves ask you for advice. In this way, you will also act, as we have seen from our foresights, but all your admonitions and explanations will be useless and will not be heeded.
But frankly, I do not understand why all this mess is going to happen, because there are exact provisions in all of the above that are aimed at the mission deployment. But everything will inevitably happen like you said, I think.
It will be, and that unfortunately everything will happen like this is due to the fact that, unfortunately, for some of the misbehaving people mentioned, firstly, the family relationships in which they grew up were and will continue to be very negative and precarious, from which, secondly, psychological disorders of various kinds will result, which for those concerned lead to a lack of understanding of good and positive behavior, as well as to underlying depressions, impatience, unreasonableness, and rejection of reality, resulting in mental instability and lack of initiative in learning. It should also be noted that except for have not carried out self-education in themselves and have consequently remained trapped in the state of their parental false and miseducation and are also extremely susceptible to negative and bad influences from the human environment. From all this, it follows that the fallibly named coming group members, in their own degenerations of selfishness, falsehood, lust for power, arrogance, know-it-all, quarrelsomeness, disregard for equal rights for all, disregard for the rules of the community as well as their self-assertion, lies and slander, etc., will not endure in mission. But all that I have explained so far is only a part of the whole, which I have to explain to you further, because lies, betrayals, and slander against you and the members of the group as well as against your group leadership will soon appear in many ways, whereby, and also, as well as will act like this. Even later, group members will still come and stay in the group for decades, but then also give up their group membership shamefully with insults, lies, false reproaches, and slander, will they? And the same will happen with the 5 persons mentioned and with your family, so that in the end only Atlantis, your direct descendant of the mission, will remain faithful to your family and will do much valuable work as a group member, as will all others who will be faithful to the mission, the duties, and their fulfillment. You will also take 2 sons at your side, with whom you will have a good fatherly relationship, just as with your own son Atlantis. Unfortunately, however, only one Zeason, who will bear the name Natan and be a son of Bernadette, will remain in the group, while the other Zeason will leave, but will still remain in very good relationship with you. For both of them, you will be the real father, whom they will love and respect, even though you will not be their father of procreation. The second foster son will be a son of your future companion, Eva, who will enter your community as a group member in some time and will reside in the center in the foreseeable future, where you two together will form a very good covenant community and will bear witness to a daughter when your present wife is divorced from you in the mid-1990s and finally leaves the center, putting an end to her very evil and nasty machinations, which will cause a great deal of discord in the group community until then. And what will be further explained and worth knowing for you with regard to what will still arise in the time to come up to the year 2029 is the following, about which you are not to make anything vociferous.
With that, I think, the excerpt from the then private conversation report should be enough, because what Quetzal further explained and suggested to you from our foresight was only for your personal knowledge but not officially intended for the general public. Following that, he told you not to let anything become vociferous about it.
Thank you, Ptah, my friend, that's really enough. More is not necessary because it clarifies everything that has to be. And of course, and you know this, I will not talk about what Quetzal entrusted to me. I also simply blocked a lot of it, so I do not always think about why I do not remember many of the things he explained to me until they happen. But that's enough, because it has to be processed so that it does not become an indigestible burden. The years of advanced knowledge, however, were much more burdensome than when something happened unexpectedly and had to be digested and processed. In any case, this is my knowledge, my experience in this respect, which is why I have always hidden and blocked a lot of knowledge regarding predictions regarding my person, the world, family, and group events, etc., because otherwise everything would have developed into intolerability. And because you and I decided a long time ago together not to fathom certain things of the future in a foresighted or predictive way, and consequently not to discuss them anymore. Because certain things of knowledge about the future are simply very burdensome in terms of thoughts, feelings, psychology, and consciousness, we will limit ourselves only to things that we have to discuss inevitably.
That should remain so, even now that I still have some things to discuss with you, and that should be private. So I want to start by starting with what's going on regarding